Hello, members. Tom Morrison here. Hope you're having a great day today. Today, we're excited to be a part of the MTI Live webcast to talk about a ginormous set of things that really impact you every single day, and that is technical specifications. We've got with us our team of our leadership from the Technical Standards Committee here, and I'd really like for a few moments, really quick though, anybody that wants to chat, as we say every time, you look down at the bottom, you'll see a chat option. You click that, and it pops on the right-hand side a box that you can chat for any questions or anything that you want to ask the committee and the technical standards group about what's going on in all these different committees that we're monitoring and weighing in on. So without further ado, let's jump into because we got some great big items that are happening in some of these. And so I want to have everybody really just kind of give a 15 seconds who you are and what company you work for, to give everybody that may not have heard you before who you're with. So let's start with Stephen Keckler.
Thanks, Tom. Well, as Tom just said, I'm Stephen Keckler. I'm with ThermTech. I'm our process metallurgist here, and I sit on ASTM, specifically subcommittee E28.06. So that's basically hardness testing.
Awesome. Bob Ferry?
I'm Bob Ferry from FBM Heat Treating out of Chicago. And yes, I'm sitting on CQI9 and Nadcap as well as AMEC. I review some of their specifications.
Awesome. Robert Peters?
Hi, I'm Robert Peters from R. Peters Consulting. I also work with MTI. I'm also on the 3D Printing Additive Manufacturing Committee, and I attend the NADCAP meetings.
Awesome. And then Joanna Lisa.
Well, good morning, everyone. Johanna Lisa. I'm Quality Director for Continental Heat Treating, Quality Heat Treating in California. I've been a Heat Treat Task Group Supplier Voting Member for 15 plus years. I'm the AQS NMC rep for 3.5 years, and have been NADCAP accredited for 20 plus years.
Wow, awesome. And then Ed Engelhardt.
Hello, Ed Engelhardt, Solar Atmospheres. I've been working with the AMEC committee of late, particularly in the various process and pyrometry specs.
Are you there, Ed? Can y'all hear us? All right, so we're good to go. So thank y'all for being here. And now, so Robert, Bob, let's start with you with CQI9. I know that revision has been passed along a number of months ago, but I always like to check in and see if anything's going on with CQI9.
Yeah, so with CQI9, again, we're meeting pretty much on a quarterly basis now since the latest revision came out. There's been a couple of questions been brought forward for the committee to take a look at and review. And so we will look at those on a quarterly basis unless it's more urgent, and then they'll send emails around and we can collaborate on that. I will say the next meeting is January 20th, so we really haven't had anything go on since our last get together with MTI. So I'm looking forward to reviewing some of the questions that came over the last quarter, and we'll see where that goes. But other than that, there's really nothing else going on with CQI9.
Well, that's always a good thing to hear, because what I love about these quarterly phone calls is if a member's going to hear about it, they're going to probably hear about it here first. So that's why these are so powerful and the best place to be when you're looking at these things. Thanks a lot for that, Bob.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So let's move into now the AMEC committee. We just came off the AMEC committee. We had about 30 people, which I always like to share with people. When the AMEC committee is it's amazing to me who doesn't realize this, but the AMEC committee designs and builds the specifications for aerospace that NADCAP audits to. And I never amazed when I talk to somebody and they think that the AMEC committee is a group of these heavenly engineers that design this stuff and filter it down to the industry. And it's people just like you and the people on this call who are developing those things. And so it's great to see that. And it used to have a prime as the chair. Now we're very fortunate to have Roy Atkins from Braddock Metallurgical, one of our great MTI members, who's the chair of that committee. And that committee, generally, when I go to these meetings, there's normally about 25 to 30 people at the meetings participating, and generally about half to 60% are commercial heat treat members, just like us, everybody on this call. So it's a very powerful group, and MTI is weighing in on a lot of things. So Ed, I'm going to divert to you and Robert Peters. I'll let Ed, you kind of take the lead and share what was talked about. I know there was like 2801, 2750, a whole host of specs that were talked about over the 2 days. And Robert, you chime in and there as they go.
Okay. Well, briefly, we went through the 2801, the titanium alloy, nothing major there. And of course, the nickel alloy, we talked briefly about that. And there were the T comments and the voting and all that. But the one thing that we did talk a lot about was 2750. And that's the pyrometry. And on that one, we also talked about the hipping side of the pyrometry issues, because 2750 as the basic does not really help with hipping. So now we're working on writing a slash spec for the pyrometry side for hipping. All right. And briefly, we went over a lot of different comments. Andrew Vessett, he made some comments on the Nadcap side of things. And then, let's see. And on the hipping side, okay, we went through a lot of issues with it regarding hipping. I don't know how many people out there still do hipping, but it's still something that we need to be working on. It's a broad base. Still, heat treating is being done that way. It's not a lot of different companies do hipping, but it's still a live process. And so we just went through basically some of the thermocouple issues that could be involved with it. The process of dealing with powdered metal and that part of it. And let's see, what else can I tell you? Just a lot of open discussions about the specification. Some that I can't really go into a great detail on, but overall, we're trying to get a good pyrometry hipping spec. Okay. Any questions?
So Ed, I know there was a lot of discussion on a lot of these different topics from a heat treater's perspective. Can you break down some of the areas, those various conversations that they had, things that is a heat treater that you and quality that you look at and go, man, this is something that we have to be paying attention to? Because I know there was a whole host of different items on, especially 2750.
Yeah, the thrust for the current revision of 2750 is to basically clarify statements in there that were less than either accurate or clear, and to have all of the analog stuff that's due to be done with the grandfather period at the end of June in 2022 taken out, and so that it can be rolled out at that time. It's interesting, though, one of the last things we talked about was the fact that in spite of the 2-year timeline, feedback from the field was that it was becoming difficult to actually get some of this digital equipment in to replace the analog equipment. So there may be a chance that that date slips. I don't know. They're talking about it. Nobody wants to let that slip, but it may come to be. We'll see. If it doesn't, and you're in that situation, the best thing you can do is write a nonconformance to yourself and make sure you have some form of changeover in place, so that if anybody calls you out on it, at least they can't write a finding against you. You already have one in your system, and if you show that you have some effort, such as a purchase order, an open purchase order, maybe communications with your supplier or software supplier about the change to digital equipment, you're likely not to get double jeopardy on that, let's say. Regarding the spec itself, 2750 had some information in it that really didn't reflect the ASTM spec regarding thermocouple types and calibration. That's being corrected. Some of the definitions were being adjusted. And there is, other commentary coming in to the next ballot. We're kind of waiting to see how this one looks when it gets issued, so it can be reviewed again by AMEC and put up on ballot. 2801, I really had high hopes to have that done soon, but we got in pages more of requested changes that I'm trying to integrate in there now. And nothing earth shattering. There may be some changes coming up to the coupon requirement for hydrogen pickup. That was something of an issue a couple ballots ago, and I think it's going to get reopened again for further discussion. 2770, there's an effort underway to bring brazed assemblies into that spec. Sunder Rajan of Raytheon is working as a sponsor for that. And I kind of think that covers the nuts and bolts of what we discussed. By the way, the comment resolution for 2750 went much more smoothly, I think, than anybody had anticipated. And we really went through it quite quickly, considering the number of comments that were there. And then I guess that's all I have really on AMEC. And then I see Nadcap, the NMC issued a letter regarding the change to classification of major findings as potential or confirmed product impact. I'm still trying to digest what all that's going to mean. It struck me as something that they're putting out there because of the amount of pushback they got from the various task groups regarding what they intended to do, and then the subsequent pushback that was picked up during the Supplier Support Committee meeting, which was pretty vocal and heated. So I don't know, maybe some others that were there can enlighten us as well.
Yeah, that's a good segue, Ed, going from AMEC. So we had the AMEC meeting was quite live. That was a good meeting and everything. And I appreciate you and Robert giving us an update of that. So Bob Ferry, why don't you chime in and provide any commentary of what you experienced at the Nadcap meeting?
Well, certainly at the NACA meeting, that Supplier Support Committee meeting that came out, and even in the heat treat task group meetings, we were concerned. We were concerned basically about the way that NACAP wanted you to have your issues on track with I lost my train of thought on this. So we were having a lot of conversation about whether what we needed to provide for Nadcap in regards to the I'm lost, Tom. I'm sorry.
Well, I know a couple big things was the Auditor Advisory. That was a big thing.
Yes.
And then obviously the Observer,
Yes.
and then fraudulent. Those were kind of three huge items that were talked about, both of theirs. So
That's what it was. It was the Auditor Advisories was the main issue, where they were going to start issuing Auditor Advisories on every finding that they had with Nadcap, as long as, and if the auditor thought there was, he had to state whether there was potential product impact or not. And that's a lot of responsibility to put onto an auditor when he's on site, and you don't want to have that that issue come up. And then in the so the suppliers were all up in arms about it at the Supplier Support Committee meeting, because they said, well, you could have all these auditor advisories, and the minute you set out an auditor advisory, your prime is probably going to be contacting you while you're still trying to resolve the Nadcap findings. And this is even before you have a chance to put your response in. It just sends it out automatically. So the question there was that, if they're sending advisories out just because an auditor wrote you up for something, then the primes have to respond to that. and especially the ones that you're doing business with, and they don't have the staff to go into all these advisories, even when you haven't even had a chance to respond to your finding, whether it was truly a finding or whether it's a major finding, whether there's product impact, no product impact. You haven't even had a chance to respond, and yet they're going to be sending out auditor advisories. So in the heat treat task group committee meeting, we did talk about that as well, because of course the supplier support committee meeting is ahead of the heat treat task group. So during the task group meeting, that all got brought up, and the primes were pretty much on board with the fact that, you know what, we don't have the staff to be addressing it anyway, and I don't want to be dealing with something that you guys haven't even had a opportunity to resolve or to state your case or anything. It just comes out as an advisory, because because the suppliers were not in support of it, and the primes really were not in support of sending out all these advisories. I think there was a comment made that in the last 2 months that 70 advisories had been sent out already to the primes. And the primes are like, we just can't keep up with all of that. So in the heat treat task group, they voted to postpone enforcing that requirement, where, you know, that you have to provide an audit advisory the minute a finding is created. So we're going to continue running to the old rules, where you have your opportunity to address the findings and to work it out with your staff engineer. And then if it is a finding with product impact, they do send out auditor advisories to the primes, which is the way it's pretty much always been. But that's a much more manageable system for the primes, and it's a better, it's a more fair system for the supplier, for the heat treater. So that's what came out of the Nadcap meeting, which I was really happy to see, because I thought this was going to be a big blowout at the Nadcap meeting, but it turned out that we were all pretty much on the same page.
Right.
Would you agree, Ed? Is that what you saw?
Oh yeah, very much so. And this recent NMC message that was sent out kind of tips the hat towards the fact that there was a lot of disagreement. There now NMC is requesting task groups to incorporate guidance into their operating procedures or audit handbooks on classification of NCRs with potential or confirmed product impact. And they're openly acknowledging that there will be opportunities for improvement down the road. So I think NMC got the message on this P and C type advisory. Well, the P's were dropped. C type advisory, where there might be product impact. And my guess is there's going to be somewhat more open discussion about it down the road as the task groups go back and come up with ways to handle this sort of finding within their own groups, so that they don't become overwhelmed with a whole bunch of false alarms, because that was the one of the issues, was going to be a lot of false positives in here that were not going to be value added for anybody.
Right.
Well, from what I heard from a lot of people, correct me if I'm wrong, when we were discussing, was the process is it's not black and white whether the auditor should check the box or not. And if they happen to check the box to cover their butt on an audit, well, guess what? All the primes just got an auditee advisory that there's something wrong on product impact, and that has a potential significant impact on that commercial heat treater's business model, which should not happen. Because
Yeah.
you don't get any, you get no due process to try and fix the system before it could be a false alarm.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
So before we get into the MMC, so Chad and Johanna, I know we got a great update from Ed and Bob. Anything you'd like to encourage the members with, or something that you heard that you think is important for them to know at the Nadcap meeting?
Well, yes, excuse me, yes, absolutely. The first thing I'd like to say is I encourage everyone to monitor NMC activities via the agendas and minutes on eAuditNet. They're available to anyone who has an eAuditNet login. And if you're not monitoring them, you will not be up to speed on what the NMC activities are. So yet again, I'm encouraging everyone to monitor what's going on in NMC via the minutes. I checked this morning, and those minutes for the October meeting have not yet been posted.
Right.
So I would expect them to be there in the next week or so, but with the holiday coming up, who knows? I do want to clarify a couple of things that Bob was saying regarding the potential and confirmed product impact. They are auditee advisories, not auditor advisories, and there's a distinct difference between those two types of notifications to primes. The other clarification I'd like to make is that the auditor doesn't have so much authority to make the decision as much as the staff engineer. So the process is the auditor identifies it as potential product impact. It goes to the staff engineer for the EC review. If there are potential product impact findings in that audit, as soon as the staff engineer clicks the button to forward that audit to the auditee, that is when the automatic auditee advisory relating to potential product impact will be sent to all of the primes, everyone. So the mechanism that the heat treat task group is using is to have the staff engineer unclick that box prior to submitting it to the auditee for their NCR efforts. The other point I'd like to make is from an NMC perspective, when this came up during one of the sub-team committee meetings, the primes were of a very like mind across the whole entire prime attendee list that would put the staff engineer in the position of acting as the prime's MRB, and the primes are not happy about that. And so it's really kind of one of those rare instances where the suppliers and the primes are on the same page. And as it relates to heat treat task group specifically, it was unanimous amongst the primes. So that's an important thing to keep in mind from an NMC perspective. I would like to address a couple of other things that happened in NMC, not the least of which is the proposed revision to AC 7000, which would include 2 new sections relating to fraudulent activity and acceptance authority media. I'm on the sub-team for that proposed revision. That proposed revision was sent to all NMC NMC voting members, in addition to all the staff engineers. They received more than 140 comments on that proposed revision, many of which were in the negative, because it appears as if 7000 is attempting to usurp the authority of 7004 and AS 9100. And so there were many objections to the specific questions that were being proposed for revision or addition, not revision, but addition to that checklist. So the next meeting for that subcommittee is on December 2nd, and we will hopefully put some of that controversy to bed. One of the key and critical items in my mind was the expectation of NMC that suppliers would be required to not just flow down, but enforce fraudulent activity and AAM policies to their sub-tiers, which in my mind is A, unauditable, and B, unenforceable. And I am going to continue along those lines, because I don't know how we can possibly expect our sub-tiers, let's just pick one, quench oil sub-tier, to comply with what we are now required to impose on them. So that's going to be another interesting conversation. And The metrics, all the subcommittees met with the exception of the oversight committee. That audit of PRI is postponed until February of 2022. So they're behind on audits of themselves, not just audits of suppliers. So I find that a little bit amusing. And that's about it, unless someone has specific questions.
I find that really ironic, Joanna.
As do I. And just a little tidbit of information, the steering committee presented the impact of the virus on PRI activities. There were more than 3,500 extensions, which I thought was a very large number.
Right. But did that impact their certification date though?
Well, this is the whole issue of the difference between an extension and an adjustment. An extension retains your original expiration date, whereas an adjustment moves your certificate expiration date out. So when I refer to extensions, I mean just that. Those suppliers that received their 90-day and this was a requirement, every 90 days you had to request an additional extension, which included the requirement for submitting a risk assessment survey. And then the staff engineer made the decision as to whether that particular supplier was worthy of that 3-month extension. So there are many suppliers who have had an audit followed rather quickly by an additional audit because they were essentially borrowing time from their current accreditation against their subsequent accreditation.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, I just want to be clarification. I know we had a member that had 4 3-month extensions and he was going to have another, I guess, full audit just 6 months after that because he got no time credit or money credit towards his next audit.
You are correct. The other option is a program they're calling the virtual verification audit, whereby you are subjected to a 1-day, 8-hour audit virtually. And there has been some pushback from the supplier base because of the fees and all of the other financial considerations that represents. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what the failure criteria is if you are being audited as a virtual verification audit versus an on-site audit, but I can certainly look that up and try and, do you remember, Ed, what the threshold was?
I'm trying to recall what it was, and I can't bring it to mind right now. I have to look it up too.
So it is, it's a rather low number, as I recall.
It is.
So
go ahead, Bob.
What they stated was that their extensions and the virtual verification audits are they're being much reduced now as compared to what they were. So for heat treat, they said 80% of the audits as of November were being performed on site, and they had have expectations that 100% of the heat treat audits are going to be performed on site as of January 2022. So that's what I heard. I don't know, I was encouraged by that because we took a strong stand on the audit extensions and the virtual verification audits, only because it really didn't impact your dates. As far as it was strictly going by your last certificate date, and that's how they would determine what your next audit date was going to be, whether you had an extension or you didn't. And I didn't think that was a right thing to do, but if they're gonna get to 100% on-site auditing in 2022, then we really don't have any arguments at that point.
Right. So did I see something in the meeting where Ed or Bob or Joanna, where they were, if you have merit, they were looking at doing less audits to try and free up some time for other audits?
I didn't hear that.
Okay. All right. I thought I saw that written on a screen someplace. I just want to verify that. All right. So anything else? Anything on Nadcap for the group?
Well, one of the things that I kind of was concerned about is heat treaters now saying they have 2 auditors on their premises when you have an observer observing an auditor. And all of a sudden they go, oh, hey, you missed that over there. Now the heat treater's going, wait a minute, I got 2 auditors.
Bob Hinkle, 1252.
Well, one thing I will say is that per OP, maybe you can help me with this one, Ed, per one of the operating procedures, that observer is not allowed to participate in the audit. That observer is supposed to observe and nothing more, not ask questions, not ask for additional objective evidence, none of that. That has been a standing concern, though, on the part of the suppliers, is that some suppliers have reported that those observers are indeed acting as a second auditor. I would suggest that if anyone on today's call experiences that type of situation, immediately contact your staff engineer, because that is not what's supposed to be happening.
Right. Yeah. One of the comments was, well, what if it's a major and if we ignore it? And it's like, well, there's 2 auditors again, that scenario. So I agree with Joanna, you know, we need to address it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that, I think there's always going to be controversy on that, because if you ask an auditor that's being assessed by a staff engineer or a prime about his auditing capabilities, he is going to have to be very meticulous in what he does to make sure that he doesn't have any negative impact on himself as an auditor. So from that perspective, it's not a good situation for an audit observer, in my opinion. And I can't imagine that the auditor, that if he's going to be here for a week, that they're not going to collaborate at some point and talk about the audit and what he's doing right and what he's doing wrong and what he needs to be looking at. So I mean, I'm on that side of the fence where I don't see this as a good situation for a heat treat supplier at all.
Agreed.
Well, that's why we keep winning every meeting, right, Bob?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So anything else on Nadcap?
Yeah, I mean, one of the items to note, I mean, everyone here's hit the main points that I have, but like you said, winning at the meetings is the February meeting obviously is going to be a virtual meeting. Originally supposed to be in Athens, but if you're a heat treater and you're currently not a voting member in the heat treat task group, this is a means to help you to get to those 2 meetings much faster without having to travel and a cost to your company. Please attend that virtual meeting in February. And then if you're not able to go to London, of course, in June, definitely make that second meeting in October in Pittsburgh to increase the number of people we have to be able to be that force in that heat treat task group and to help against Nadcap when there are these type of issues.
Yeah.
I agree. That's a good point, Chad. I mean, for anybody online that does not know, when we go to Nadcap meetings now in the U.S., we have a 90-minute, and we had a great turnout at the Nadcap meeting. We do a 90-minute to 2-hour meeting prior to the opening night supplier support committee meeting, where we talk about all these issues. And what it does is it gives all the members that are there confidence to walk in, to know that they're not alone and they're not there by themselves looking at these issues. They're there with a team of 30 other people who have the same issues. And then on the second night, we do a cocktail reception for that same group for 2 hours after the supplier support committee meeting. That just gives a chance to kind of check in and talk about what did you hear day 1 and what should we be pressing on day 2. So I mean, I've literally had people tell me they can feel the presence of MTI in that room when they're talking about issues. And when we go to breaks, you can see members huddle up, start strategizing what they need to do. So MTI and the membership at large, the volunteers, we appreciate the team on this call are really trying to have an opportunity to really make an impact. So if you can be a part of those 2 meetings, because there's not a large presence at those meetings from a physical standpoint. So the more people that are online at both those meetings, the more powerful impact we're going to be able to have. Now, one of our members said, can that be, I think all the meetings, the next 2 meetings are held virtually, correct, Chad? Is that what you're saying?
No.
At this point, the February meeting is virtual.
Right.
Originally was supposed to be in Athens, Greece. The June meeting at this point will be in person.
Okay.
But the thing to note is, to be a voting member of NADCAP, you have to attend 2 meetings,
Right.
to become a voting member. So that Athens virtual meeting allows you that first chance,
Right.
to go ahead. That's your first meeting, and then if you attend in October in Pittsburgh, which we highly recommend because that is obviously the busiest and most attended meeting, is
Right.
to attend that second meeting. Then you become a voting member of the Heat Treat Task Group at NADCAP.
Right. Awesome. Well, thanks for that update, Chad. So to end on NADCAP, I want to encourage members in one way. So MTI a couple years ago developed a audit database where you could easily log in a confidential and password secured account where only you see your stuff, a database. And what you do is you log in, and when you put add audit, you're able to add your audit findings from your last, we like to get people to put in their last 2 audits, but you're able to cut and paste from the auditor's Word document that you got into the system and save that. And what it does, it allows you to go in, when you put yours in, it allows you to go in and see, and we're trying to populate that database. So imagine you being able to log in and see audits from, we represent about 65% of all the accredited suppliers out there. So imagine being able to log in and look at 100 audits with 600 findings and see what the auditor's wording was and what the corrective actions were, and if they were major, minor, and when the date of nonconformance is. So you can see, when, and maybe a finding becomes the big finding of the month kind of thing, because people see, oh my gosh, that's happening. So I want to look at that. So I want to encourage you, you're going to be getting an email before the end of this month with your your username and password. And we encourage you to really log in and get your last 2 audits in the system. No one can see your name. No one can identify anyway who that finding is with, but it's a way for you to share information so you can learn from one another in terms of how things are going on with the findings and when they're happening and what sections really be written up. So really pay attention to that as it comes to in the next 2 weeks, and your probably your quality manager or your owner who's on this call will get that email. All right, well, that's great. So thank you for that, everybody. Now, the last 2 things we want to cover. So I want to go to Stephen Keckler here. He attended the last ASTM meeting. And Stephen, what'd you find out there for us?
Sure. So I'm going to go over a couple of small things first before I get into the bigger discussion point. For those of us in the room that do mechanical testing, E8's latest ballot came up in front of full committee. It had an administrative negative to basically just get some more editorial changes done, but expect a new revision of that probably next year at this point. I wouldn't say any major changes coming to E8, mostly just clarifications for the requirements and some more uniform tolerancing stuff. And then E23, so that's Sharpie. It's undergoing a fairly significant revision as far as a clarification of testing and rounding requirements. There was 3 separate balloted things on the last vote that came up. All of them had administrative negatives for basically more editing. So that at some point is going to have to go back to ballot. So more updates to come. And then the big conversation point is around E18. Same thing I've been discussing for the last 6 months or so now, but just a reminder for everybody. There's a proposed revision to E18, so making it to where you would have to report the original scale and value if you're doing a hardness conversion, as well as you have to report it. If you're doing a roundness correction, you would have to report that one's being done, and if you're using a correction other than E18, you would have to list the source of that correction. Now, you could either do that directly on the test report or through other contractual documents like quote, something like that. That being said, at our last meeting, so there was a big vote on that back in October, with some negatives lodged from myself, Ed, and a couple other individuals. There's a lot of discussion about that, about 2 hours of discussion about that at our last meeting, with a lot of back and forth. About half a dozen of us, mostly commercial heat treaters, had some issues with the way it was written right now, which would argue for some changes. The short answer is that there's not going to be any changes more than likely. At the end of that conversation, there was a straw poll to see whether there was favor or disfavor on finding the negatives persuasive. In other words, would they hold up? At that time, the straw poll was overwhelmingly to find them not persuasive. That's not an official vote. There will be an electronic ballot that comes out where there's going to be an official vote on all of the negatives to find them persuasive or not. But at this point, your expectation should be that they're going to be found not persuasive and that E18 is going to go forward as written. There's, at this point, really not a lot to stop that from happening. We're kind of exhausted all of the measures there is. So unless the administrative council, for whatever reason, finds an objection editorial, expect that to come out in the relatively near future.
So Stephen, is that the one where you're going to have to provide that on a certification?
Yes. Yes. Non-negotiably.
So we weren't able to get it changed to recording instead.
Yeah, we tried. There was a number of us that tried really hard to get some middle ground here, where there was some degree of reasonability in it, but a lot of the manufacturers and a lot of the testing labs just had no sympathy to that. And it looks, like I said, it looks like at this point, specifically if we're talking about conversions and reporting conversions, it looks like the only maybe way out of that is if you have a specific waiver from a specific customer on a specific project. But even there's some question about whether or not that would be considered an acceptable practice. I would not lean on that necessarily as a safe crutch. So if your system does not already do so, I would strongly recommend you start getting the ball rolling on getting your system ready to manage reporting converted values. If you have any questions about what that should look like, I would recommend opening up E140 or A370. Both of those have what would be considered acceptable formats. As for the roundness correction and noting whether that was or wasn't done, there's a fair bit of debate about that. At this point, it seems like there's consensus that that's something you can either build into a boilerplate or work into your contractual agreements. There were some people who weren't very happy with those stances, so no guarantees, but at this point, that seems like something that would be considered acceptable. But once again, I would strongly recommend you start talking with the people that set up your reports and your systems and get things in place for that.
So Stephen, past that stuff that you just talked about, is there anything else that you hear in the grapevine or rumor mill or just comments during the ASTM meetings that everybody wants to be aware of, that, hey, they're thinking about this, or anything that we should be putting on our radar screen?
Yes, actually, there's two more things. And they're both having to do with E18. E18 was very popular at the last meeting. It was almost to exclusion what we talked about. I guess three more things. So two more things with E18. There was some more discussion about the significant lack of reporting when people are or not inspecting with the portable. There hasn't been any more movement on being more firm on that just yet, but I would not be surprised if the next year or so we didn't see a proposed revision to strengthen the stance on having to do that. It's all already there, but it's currently not done a lot, and there's not a lot written on it. But so far-flung future. And then there is some discussion that was started, and we'll see if it goes anywhere, about more control over what anvils can and can't be used when doing verification, whether that's indirect verification, direct verification, or daily verification. Those are all considered different things within E18. That came up right at the end of the meeting, and frankly, there wasn't a lot of stomach for discussion at that point. So it will probably be at our next meeting before there's any significant conversation on that, if there's any at all. And then a couple very brief things. E140 sometime hopefully in the next year is going to get a revision with some additional tables. That would be great. That actually should be really good for those of us who are always wondering what is the appropriate table to select for some of these alloys. But that is down the road.
It's actually good to hear in a specification that good things are coming down the road, right?
Yes, yes. For once, a positive.
Right.
traction.
When you hear most things, it's like, oh my gosh, more findings, more findings. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for your involvement with ASTM and being able to provide the updates so we can keep our eyes and pulse on that. You've been a big addition to this group, and so thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so we saved the best for last. Mr. Chad Simpson, the big AS 13100 that we have put on our radar screen in a big way, and I have the slides that you sent. Whenever you say, hey, share the screen, I can pull those up. But what's the latest that's going on with AS 13100?
Well, Tom, you can go ahead and show the slide, and I can talk while the slide is up there. So we talked about this at the Nadcap meeting in October a little bit in our MTI group. AS 13100 is a new standard that was released back in March of this year that is for those working with aerospace engine manufacturing. The thing with AS 13100 is it's currently an addendum to AS 9100. So if you are, as most of those of us that are in the aerospace sector are AS 9100 registered, this will apply to you and probably be flowed down from your aerospace primes. Some points to note out of AS 13100 is, you can go to the next slide, Tom. So creation of the standard was this past year. Oh, go back up one. There you go. So again, released March of this year for those in the engine manufacturing sector. Current planned implementation date is January 1st of 2023. An item of note on that, which is actually the last bullet point. At this point, the third-party certification bodies, such as BSI, SAI, or whoever you have as your third-party auditor, do not have auditors trained to this point, and they are also fairly unaware of this standard. As I'm working with BSI a little bit on this, it's not really been flowed down to them either. So that implementation date, I think, is a lofty date for them because there's been no training, no items such as that. For those of us, though, here in the MTI group, key points to include is usage of AS 9145, which includes APQP. For those of you that are not as in tune to the automotive sector, this will include the areas of PPAP, control plans, FMEA, MSA, and SPC. If you're currently not using any of those tools, I highly recommend that you take time with your quality group and look at training in these areas, ask questions. Those of us here in the MTI group that work in the automotive sector are well in tune to a lot of these requirements. So don't be afraid to ask questions about what does PPAP mean? What do control plans, FEMAs, what does that mean to me? Another big item out of that is problem solving using an 8D approach. If you currently do not use an 8D, this is a methodology that they're looking to flow down as a requirement. And a big addition to that is the human factors. Some of you may already be aware of using human factors from the FAA, also known as the Dirty Dozen, in problem solving. But for years and years, we've not really been allowed to use human factors as a potential root cause in problem solving, as many of you know. But this is definitely something that AS 13100 is going to look to fully implement, is the use of human factors. As I said, currently 13100 applies to engine manufacturers. So the next thing to look at, Tom, you can go ahead and go to the last slide, is AIA, the Aerospace Industries Association, is also looking how to standardize the flow down of their requirements from the primes basically to the suppliers. They started a committee in November of 2020. I joined this committee in March of this year. Basically, that's when I found out about AS 13100 along with this committee. Their expectation right now is to create a standardized flow down of requirements, also looking to be potentially in alignment with 13100 that would affect anyone working with aerospace primes. So at this point, they are reviewing the documents that each of them uses. This is a group right now, at least 20 primes being spearheaded by Lockheed Martin, Boeing, GD, and a few others that are really the main key players that are looking at their current documents and how either they can standardize those, or they're also looking at AS 13100 as being that potential standard or document that they can use to flow down everything to us as suppliers. Their point at this is looking to have a completion of the flow out by August of 2022, whether that's creating their own standard or basically adopting AS 13100. Again, that plan is to create a single point standardization to reduce any redundancy and overlapping. At this point, it's more of a collection of documents, so not a major movement at this point, except for the collection of documents. And they're finding, of course, as we do, working with the primes, there are major challenges to standardization and getting flow down. If they're not able to come to, a decision on their own standard, I see 13100 being adopted potentially by all the primes. So it's kind of what I have at this point. I will definitely keep this group informed as I hear more.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good work, Chad. Like I
Agreed.
said, there's only certain people that are plugged into this, so
Yes.
we appreciate your effort on that for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, Chad, I was going to say, as we've learned from all the specs, 27, 50, 59, all of them in Nadcap, AMEC, the time to get involved in these specs is on the front, right? Not on the
Yes.
back when you hear that it's gotten. So we appreciate you getting us clued in at a very early stage, and we'll keep pressing on that.
Yeah, luckily AIA, and the way we actually found out about this was through part of our marketing and sales department. They were having some discussions, and they said, well, we weren't aware of that. And they said, well, we're looking for some suppliers to join, and they actually did get some suppliers. It's not just the prime. So there's probably about 10 suppliers. We're the only heat treat at this point supplier, but there are definitely some other suppliers throughout the supply chain that are part of the AIA.
Yeah, because that's a phrase you don't say at the time of audit, right? We weren't aware of that.
Yes.
That doesn't work too well. So Mr. Ed and Bob is the co-chairs of this great hardworking task group or committee. Any final thoughts to send to the members after all we've talked about?
I have a question for Chad. I noticed one of those pages of the AS 13100 promotional materials included a Nadcap logo. What's that about?
They just have that logo there, and Tom, feel free to send out this slideshow to the group. I am perfectly okay with that. That is just a high-level slide that AIA had created. It just says that by expected completion date of 2025, 13,100, or similar will be implemented across the aerospace. And then they have for Nadcap, it just says recognizes Nadcap certification for special processes for both internal and external operations. So that's just showing that the aerospace will recognize those for definitely us, a special process of heat
So
treatment.
Nadcap's not jumping into the auditing of 13,100 business, are they?
Well, not yet. Obviously,
Never say never.
they are on the
Empire building here.
9100.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Anything
So
else, Mr.
I
Bob?
mean, all I can say is that there is a lot going on, and it looks like we're blessed to have everybody on this committee to weigh in on some of the different issues and make sure that we're all seeing things the right way and can influence or make our opinions known when it's needed and in critical times, to at least give the people that are making these standards and specifications pause to at least consider what we're talking about. So all I can say is, yeah, thanks for the effort. Everybody's doing a great job with it.
Awesome, Bob. Well, thank you, everybody. So I just want to leave you with this, members. Technical specifications is the #1, obviously, influence in your business because it's the law of the land. And we got a great team of volunteers and all these groups that are working on your behalf. Stay tuned in, stay engaged, and stay on the forefront of the stuff with MTI. So we appreciate your involvement, your membership, and your support. Because, you know, I always say you're not just strong, you're MTI strong. Y'all have a great weekend and have a great Thanksgiving this week. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Yep.
Have a good Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yes.